So, welcome everyone. Welcome the Sangha. Welcome the World Sangha. Welcome everyone who has been with us, who haven't been with us. It all shall be fun. So, we've got this very beautiful theme. We've got quite a few questions submitted, so I've got them all printed for making it easier for me to read off the page. And the kind of tentative title for our today's gathering is Awakening Today, and what that entails in terms of personal transformation and how that in turn could impact the state of collective consciousness. So it's a vast, as you realize, big topic, and I would invite all of you, this is a little plug-in I have to do myself, to consider the offering that our team has prepared, where that theme was born, in fact, spontaneously as a result of the exchanges at one of our winter tour gatherings in Zurich. And it was a weekend gathering with Friday evening darshan dedicated to paying tribute to the work of Carl Jung, particularly his known Kundalini seminars. And we bounced from there, and then Saturday, Sunday, we had a non-residential full 2 days. So the idea was born to cut it into a small, very affordable format and to offer it to all of you interested under the same title as we have gathered today, Awakening Today. Simply because it just turned out that the whole discussion that unfolded from there and then was at that pertinent place of where do we find ourselves, each and every one of us individually, and how does that relate to the collective state of affairs? How is it all related? What are we to do with the current state of affairs, where it is not a secret that awakening is not part of the vocabulary of psychiatrists? It is thankfully already a vocabulary of the psychologists, some psychologists, but still far from being acknowledged as part and parcel of what it means to be a fully developed human being. So this is what the topic of today's gathering, and many of the questions that some of you have submitted are naturally fall into that topic or under that topic, and you will see why. And I can tell you already why, simply because we cannot speak of any individual awakening outside of the greater context, both cultural, in terms of what it represents in a given moment in time, and how the collective consensus views that what is considered to be, in a way, by large, falling away from that consensus, even if temporarily. And on the other hand, it's very important to have this greater picture with regard to what we mean by individual awakening. What does it entail in terms of the trajectory of its unfoldment, and what we then to integrate into our life, because we all are here not just for the fireworks associated with the, let's say, the most immediate impact of what the awakening often accompanied with, but we are to continue, we are to integrate that, we are to bring that into all our relationships, connections. In other words, awakening here needs to be dealt with that degree of understanding that no matter how existential it may feel, and it does feel in a given moment in time, it is all for the sake of embracing this life to a greater degree. Embracing this life doesn't mean that we are somehow returning to the world only to get immersed into the attachments of what the world is known for, but to have, but to be able to form qualitatively new connections, which can then open up the unthinkable, unimaginable vistas of how we can live our life in terms of purpose, in terms of that greater connectivity, in terms of what it represents to love thy neighbor, what it represents to be here for the sake of what it really entails. So this is more or less our topic for today. And therefore it's given that subtitle from personal transformation as a reflection of the transformation in the collective consciousness. Because we have this a proposition, this suggestion, which simply echoes and chimes with what has been already propounded and emphasized by those who came before us and those voices out there that we can hear today among the peers in the field, that there is no such thing as just individual transformation. Because each and every individual, each and every one of us is a walking universe. Each and every one of us is a reality of consciousness expressing itself here and now in most unique, irreproducible manner. So we are not carbon copies here walking around, but we are here a totality of expression of consciousness. Yes, we can argue that there are different perspectives on what the individual consciousness represents. There are perspectives that are leaning more towards that it's a limited portion of greater awareness. It's just that what is somehow filtered and bound by space-time causation, and therefore can never be spoken in greater terms. And there are terms that are used for that in Sanskrit and many other cultures, depending on the part of the perennial tradition this may belong to. But that what is spoken here as an individual soul has also some of the most extraordinary perspectives, that this soul is nothing other than awareness in disguise. Literally, awareness disguises itself as this experience, as this world, and therefore as this individual. So each individual, therefore, is awareness in that mode of when it draws, as it were, a veil towards itself. Awareness which conceals perhaps its true magnanimity, its unimaginable power in this confined so and so, as you and me, in this dance of world we call life. So, what I would like to draw our attention here before we go to questions, because we have quite a few questions and I would like to give due to some of them, because some of them are more expansive, others short and brief. To that, what we understand by individual expression of, let's say, utmost reality. And how can that then be reconciled in terms of being many of us? How do we reconcile that with the obvious, directly cognizable by everyone here and now of being me as so and so, in this body, with this story, with this and this and that. And then there's the world of my connections, the world which is made of likes and dislikes, of people I love and care for, and people I, well, let's face it, give less attention to, and all that we can expand into the infinitude of suggestions. So, how do we reconcile this if all this is, in fact, awareness concealing itself in each and every individual? Who is this individual? Who am I in this whole change of costumes, in all this hide and seek, in all this performing for its own sake, hiding itself only to reveal itself? So the question here of that, what we perceive as other, with that canonical by now answer given by Ramana Maharshi sometimes in the 20th century, when asked, what about others, Bhagwan? He purportedly retorted back, there are no others. So how do we reconcile that? Are there others? Or is it only pure subjectivity of my own experience, and everyone, therefore, is some form of projection, some form of reflection, some form of either hallucination or reality which I have no idea to comprehend? This is what I invite you to reflect on. This is what I invite us to look into. And for that, I suggest this as a proposition that the true measure of individual is not only confined to what we call individual experience given in a given moment in time. It's not confined to what we experience in waking state of consciousness, and it's not even confined to what we experience in our dreams. It is not confined to what we experience in the nothingness of the deep sleep. And furthermore, it is not confined to the degrees of those states known as absorption, those deep meditative states known as samadhis. Individual here is absolute. And there are degrees of that which are available to absolutely all and every one of us with this immediate adjustment that is required. Because it's not us. Never there was us. It's only I, the supreme subjectivity of awareness, which is simply shines forth equally in every single human being, but the way it then breaks down through the prism of individual so-called experience is then gives us that unique hue, unique shades, how the light breaks in to the rainbow colors through the prism where the white light goes through. And it is that instrumentality, this mechanics and the instrumentality of how awareness breaks itself, as it were, in the myriad of forms and phenomena, but the experience always belongs to the I. Every experience is always has that distinctive element, distinctive flavor. We cannot say we experience, even if we're holding hands with someone, even if it's a shared experience in a given moment in time, sharing a meal, sharing a sunset, sharing a cup of tea, sharing a most intimate moment of an embrace. It is still experienced individually as an I-ness of awareness for the sake of its own thrill. So this is just a proposition in terms of there are no others. There are others in terms of the how it is given to the mundane language, because it's simply a matter of what is being accepted with the development of language itself. So it goes unchecked. It is accepted simply as the reality of what we consider to be belonging to the sphere of the language. But the reality of experience is by far subtler, by far more profound in a sense of what language can convey here. So this reconciliation of my awakening, my story, my transformation, and the world, in fact, is one and the same reality. One and the same reality. They appear as two, but they're in fact one reality. So this is why, again, going back to Ramana Maharshi's example, when asked what's the greatest thing I can do to help the world, he said, realize the self. Obviously, this is the perennial message of the entire non-dual traditions that can be traced throughout many different cultures and civilizations. Realize the self, know thyself. Everything is in that. There is nothing other than that. And that's all there is. So I would be open to anything that would be on the wake of what we just uh, spoke on the spur of the moment, but that topic. But I feel maybe giving now to the submitted questions in advance will give us an opportunity to give this a gloss coming from each individual story and then see how it all sits together. Where is that unifying thread? Where is that invisible thread that holds it all together? Where is that what stitches it all together? Invisible as that inner seam that holds it. And in fact, and that's where the stress is always, not on the fabric itself, but on the place where it all stitched and held together. And by the way, I will begin this with wishing you all a happy Akshaya Tritiya. Today is the very auspicious day in the Vedic calendar, which is celebrated once a year, and it falls today on April 22nd as that day of lasting victory, Akshaya Tritiya. And that day of lasting victory is a very powerful combination of planetary situation where it's good to do some offerings, it's good to set some intentions, it's good to make some wholesome projections for what we want to do in life. How do we want this to pan out itself? This is a great time to do sacrificial offerings like yagyas, homas. This is a great time to meditate. This is the great time to reflect on the ultimate state of affairs. This is a great time to simply be lost in beauty. And of course, it's a great time to have a cup of tea. So I will turn now to the questions, okay? Right. And the questions are simply come in sequential manner as they were received, so no priority were given whatsoever. So just as they were received, so I will just read and respond on the spot so as to then turn to the potentially perhaps questions that may be posed in the chat. But just hold on yet with the questions in the chat so that they don't get covered by many other comments. I will give you maybe formulate the question Maybe type it somewhere and then paste it into the chat when we turn our attention there, okay? All right, dears, here we go. First one, pilgrimage and Mary Magdalene. Since some of you given your real names and even the whereabouts, others prefer to be called Chica, El Casa, I would simply omit naming any of you, and I'm sure you will recognize your own questions. And I think this is also with regard to your anonymity, and some of you prefer to remain such. This has a little background before the question. I looked at the old conference talk of you, and you mentioned that there was a period in your life when you did a pilgrimage and were inspired by Mary Magdalene. I was touched to hear that, and you had the pull to do that pilgrimage, and was wondering if this has a meaning on the path. For some reason, her insights and presence are in my life, and it just comes to me as a big gift. It is like she is teaching me on a very subtle level. So the question, I'm very skeptical about people channeling and tapping into her energy. So could you give me an understanding of what it means when a Devi or spiritual figure comes as a big inspiration? Well, this belongs to the archetypal forces of nature, or archetypal forces of consciousness, more accurately put. It's something that we occasionally revisit and go back to in our discourses, in answers, and we had even whole immersions dedicated to that as the feminine powers of God some years ago. Certainly the theme that we should keep going back to. In this case, it's not that I was drawing inspiration from Mary Magdalene. It was more on a very subtle level of, I don't even want to put it in a sense of that there was this curiosity to find out, because quite frankly, I grew up in a very different setting, in a very different culture. Growing up in Uzbekistan, in the city of Tashkent, hearing namaz 5 times a day in the old town, with my father being from Tajikistan, the Muslim background was dominating when I grew up. So, and yet, with my move to the West, sometimes in my mid-20s, when I've settled in London, this whole field opened up for me, where I was catching up very hungrily to learn about the origins of Christianity. And when I've learned that apparently the way the Christianity came into Europe was through that story of Saint Matthew and Mary Magdalene being put on a boat to go into exile, because otherwise they would have been persecuted, as the story goes. So where their boat is basically landed somewhere in the south of France, and where they found themselves, and that particular geographical location, which is associated with this exact place where Mary Magdalene purportedly spent 20 years doing her, whatever that sadhana was, whatever that spiritual practice was. We have no idea. We don't know. The teachings of Christ did not survive in its authentic form. We can only presume what it was based on. Certainly, she spent probably hours and hours in meditation, contemplation, maybe contemplating on what was the bits of memory of her encounters with her teacher, whom she lovingly addressed as Rabbi. And that touched me deeply somehow. It touched me to the degree that there was this universal sentiment that grew and grew over the years. And with me becoming a meditator, I was given to the practice of transcendental meditation, I already recognized Maharishi Mahesh Yogi as that undeniable authority, and there was just that. When it all culminated in the strong desire to pay that homage, pay that tribute, and do that pilgrimage, which was one and the only true pilgrimage I've ever did, I have to confess. So I don't want to go into deeply personal experiences of when I was up there. The cave itself was closed for visitors for many years, so I wasn't privileged enough to go to a place which prior to that was open to public. And but at the top, after coming to the place where the entrance to the cave, which was closed, you go up quite a steep, stony, rocky path to the very top of that mount, San Boam. And on the top, there is a tiny little, you can't even call it a chapel, because only single person can enter. It's tiny, it's smaller than half of my room I'm sitting in, and I have a very small office here. So it's like literally, you can place that chapel into my room. That's what I'm trying to say. And I had some extraordinary moments of connection. So what was speaking to me at that time wasn't clear, but later on it revealed itself as these deeper structures of consciousness began to be awakened, as these subtle levels of consciousness begin to be now brought to the actualized level, which all and part and parcel of all proper sadhana. This is what the spiritual practice meant to do. These archetypal forces reveal themselves, and they can reveal themselves in a variety of ways. It can be spoken of in terms of that individual connection to the divine, exemplified in that personal relationship with the divine, that Ishta Devata. We have some material about that, and plenty of material out there now these days. So that Ishta Devata is that connection to one of the Shaktis, one of the powers. It doesn't have to be Shaktis, it can be a masculine form of the divine. It can be any form of the divine. There are many. I mean, India, for that matter, is very known for rich variety of various forms the divine could take, or one can have a connection to variety of different forms. Some of them are very well known at the level of the folk. Others are lesser known. But one way or another, what you're asking here seems to me is with regard to that, what here the rekindling and somehow reawakening of this, what perhaps prior to that were dormant structures of consciousness, which are at the, perhaps not at the ultimate level of reality of who we are, but certainly at the substratum of the experiences, at the substratum of our psychological makeup, as the cornerstones, the building blocks of our psyche. So this is made out of these divine structures. And some of the unique aspects of these structures are then express themselves more acutely. And then the relationship can be formed. And in some spiritual traditions, as aforementioned in India, for example, it's part and parcel. It's part and parcel of today's Hinduism, but not only. It's something that goes back to the Vedic times, where this understanding of the intimate connection to the superstructures of what makes up that what we then are being inspired by and being guided by and being protected by and being even given insights into the ultimate state of affairs by. Let me give you a completely different example now, example from the ancient world, an example of someone like Odysseus, those of you who are familiar with the ancient Mediterranean mythology, the or so-called Greek mythology, ancient Greek mythology, Odysseus had Athene as a goddess. The Athena, or Athena, depending on the pronunciation, was that Ishtadevata of the great hero of the Iliad and Odyssey. Odysseus had her as that divine power, that feminine power that would be summoned up whenever he is in trouble and in most need of her intervention. So this gives us this completely different analogy, borrowed from a different culture, to understand greater what that archetypal connection to the divine forms of energy represents. So I thought to add that. So this in turn takes us to following up question, loosely entitled Awakening and Schizophrenia Diagnosis. And there is a short background also, and it goes as follows. My awakening has been earth-shattering. It occurred spontaneously 4 years ago. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia when this took place because I had entered into what the medical community calls acute psychosis. I had delusions and all the symptoms of so-called schizophrenia. However, I have been off the treatment for 3 years, 1 year of intense antipsychotic treatment, and I'm going through a stage of intense Kriyas, daily yoga, for up to 6 hours a day. The yoga gets so intense sometimes that I feel as though I am dying. And the question, how does one attempt to reverse this false diagnosis? The medical community is so hard to communicate this type of phenomenon without sounding absolutely insane. I would like to hear your thoughts on this. Okay, I think this deserves a great attention, and I would begin with what may sound a little bit unapologetic and direct and slightly commanding, but it only for the sake of higher good in terms of what you're going through, what the question is going through. And there are hundreds, thousands of people that are going through this, what you have described here, right now as we speak, right now as we gathered here. Thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, we don't know the number, maybe many hundreds of thousands of people who have been repeatedly misdiagnosed and instantly, soon as they were misdiagnosed, mistreated, forcibly often treated. This has been going on for a long, long time. This is one of those cultural biases that we are up against, and we are already a third generation, maybe, certainly at least a second generation. In my work, I often refer back to the work of the Grof family. They're no longer family, but Stanislav and Christina Grof. They authored a book together back, I think, in the 70s, so maybe it's 1980, the latest, which dealt precisely with that phenomenon. It dealt with the misunderstanding that prevails in the psychological and psychiatric circles, among the psychiatrists and psychologists, with regard to what is also could helpfully termed as maturation of the soul. So in other words, it's simply could be spoken of in terms of the process of growing up. Not growing up as it is spoken by Ken Wilber, before waking up, growing up. I'm not talking about the development of the psychological capacity for what awakening can present one with, which can be undesirable, particularly in the cases of those who are not fully psychologically developed, who, let's say, are lagging behind in terms of their development as individuals. It's as simple as that. So they would be still in need to catch up on that evolution of what it means to be an individual being, healthy, developed, with healthy boundaries, with healthy understanding of what one is in relation to others, what it takes to be in communication, what it takes to be in a relationship, and so forth. But we're speaking about here in terms of this, by the way, not that that's not important, it's just as important as anything else here when it comes to the awakening. But we spoke about growing up here in terms of the another phase in the evolution of what it takes to be a human. And I often give examples with a puberty, because the age of puberty is when we, for the first time, acutely experience all this breakaway from being a child. This is the original fall, that biblical original fall, where we fall from the garden of innocence, where we suddenly recognize with great acuity, with great, often painful intimacy of what it means to be a young woman, a growing man. And this is yet another one of those phases, just as the phase of becoming a grown up. Sometimes it happens between the early 20s. It may extend with some of us, may take someone way into the 30s, maybe even 40s, who knows. But approximately, this is where we are fully developed. The so-called, psychologically speaking, our ego, the boundaries of our identity are meant to be fully developed by the age of, let's say, 22, 25 at the very maximum. We should pretty much have an idea by then who we are in the sense of this living individual, what we want from life, where we're going, how we conduct our affairs. And the phase of awakening is another phase altogether. So, of course, it will be misdiagnosed and mistreated because there is no shared consensus among the medical authority. I don't want to go into the territory of conspiracy that somehow someone is out there wants to keep us dumb and under control and what have you, and therefore these psychiatric treatments are devised like in a manner of this kind of society that's supposed to be a prison-like, even if the subtle prison where you can go to the mall and freely spend your money buying yourself anything you fancy. But this is just that. You traverse from here to there. I'm not talking about that necessarily. But there is simply a great rift between, and the great rupture rather, between where we find ourselves in terms of the consistency and demographic explosion with regard to how many people wake up today. Even if we are to compare it, let's say, with what was happening in the 60s and the 70s, which back then it was also mistreated there and then. Therefore, that reference to the, by now, seminal work of the Stanislav and Christina Grof is highly recommended because this is just as relevant today as it was back then. And I want to link this perhaps with the previous question on Mary Magdalene and relate a personal story here before I answer that question in full, is that I've gotten to know a relatively young lady. Not we've never met physically, but online only, and she was planning to come to one of our programs during the time when we were still based in North America, traveling between California, British Columbia, back to Costa Rica, and the whole circle again. And she went through this profound awakening, and she was a loyal follower, that remote follower online. She was in constant communication with us. She's even temporarily joined the team, did some, I think, transcription. But what happened is, before she had the chance to come to the immersion, she had this very strong episode, and she just broke out fully, just as what you described here. She had this earth-shattering awakening, and she had this very strong identification with Mary Magdalene. She felt Mary Magdalene speaking through her, and she had in fact spoken tongues. She was reciting some verses in we don't know, because this was already related to me post factum. Could be in ancient Hebrew or Aramaic, but one way or another, she was married lady, and her husband forcibly, with the agreement of her parents, took her to the psychiatric hospital, and she was treated there. So she wrote me from the hospital already after she undergone the treatment, after she was sedated and suppressed and everything. It stayed with me for a number of years, almost like a heavy weight that I had carried, because there was this feeling that I somehow wasn't there for her when she needed that. Somehow it just, something was against that timing, that she didn't come to one of our programs. Perhaps if she did earlier, this could have been prevented. This literally, like something like laid off my chest, stayed with me for many, many years. And I have almost promised myself never to beat about the bush anymore when it comes to these cases, when it comes to people who go through this in real time. So therefore, you're asking me, how does one attempt to reverse this false diagnosis? You cannot reverse that false diagnosis, and you don't need to reverse that false diagnosis. You simply need to know fully in your own consciousness that what you are going through is a legitimate process. In fact, it's so legitimate that no awakening, proper awakening, ever goes without what you have described, even to some degree. With some people, it may be more dramatic because it can express itself in a very compact period of time. Therefore, tradition speaks of it in three ways: intense, intermediate, and gradual. The intense one, often referred to as violent, because it is accompanied by violent expressions in a sense of its somatic language. But it's not violent in terms of what the term here, violence, represents, even though one can feel as if violated, assaulted by consciousness, one's own consciousness, you see? There is another extraordinary work authored by this lady, which was classic of its day. I think it was called Collision with the Divine or something like that, or Collision with the Absolute. I don't remember exactly, but the term collision, you see, I think it's a French lady who had this extraordinary, momentarily awakening in an extraordinarily short period of time. It started, as she recalled that in her book, as she was leaping on a bus from the bus stop to catch the bus, leaping on the bus, and then the whole awakening as the bus would go, and she was on that bus just holding for dear life. to going through this transformative experience which shook the ground beneath her feet forever. So what my suggestion here is that you need to simply be smart. There's no way you can outsmart medical authority. Anytime you begin to speak with an attempt to appeal to their understanding, they will make notes in the medical journal. Unfortunately, that's the case. Unless, of course, there is a completely exception which defies the rule otherwise, where you can run on someone who, perhaps by virtue of being exposed, more open-minded, or perhaps going through something firsthand themselves, would recognize that, and they will be able to be more caring, more sympathetic, less dismissive, certainly greater chance that you will not be forcibly submitted to these treatments that are now a regular, stable state of affairs. So we're going to do this work. It will take some time. It will take some time until it will reach forums, conference halls, symposiums, when it will finally be spoken out loud from widely shared platforms, where that necessity to reevaluate our understanding of a human psyche. But it is not yet there. So we cannot fool ourselves in hopes that somehow, somewhere, we can find a middle ground between not being considered gone crazy, whilst also receiving treatments from the medical personnel, medical authorities, who seem to know what they're doing, but God forgive me, they have absolutely no clue unless they went through it firsthand. So all this talks about finding any middle ground, and I've had this before as well. Can I take this but not that? Can I be submitted to this treatment? No, all you need to do now is to go completely alternative. Management of your humors, understanding what exacerbates the process, how to find clarity. You need to have understanding of human physiology from the point of view of holistic perspective and work your way from there. Okay, God bless. I wish you best of luck in that. That takes us to the question simply entitled collective consciousness. Very short background. I'm a psychologist and a Siddh, and very interested in collective consciousness, as well as the collective unconscious, in brackets, Carl J. Jung, and the collective trauma, in brackets, Thomas Hobel. I'm trying to navigate through my personal circumstances and longing to also beneficially engage with the current collective consciousness. A question. I would like to hear your description of collective consciousness, and also if and how you see it interconnected with Maharishi's 7 states of consciousness. So the last here reference is given to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's exposition on the 7 state of consciousness. For those of you who are not familiar, which consists of the 3 relative states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep. The 4th, the so-called Turiya, the transcendent. The 5th state of consciousness, identified by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi as cosmic consciousness, often referred by me for the sake of clarity as the witnessing state of consciousness. Then the 6th state of consciousness, known as God consciousness, or deep refinement of perception, the so-called celestial perception. Finally, the unity consciousness, which is the unity or the union of subject and object. In addition, inside the TM movement, in certain circles, there are talks of the yet an extra level of consciousness, not with reference to the seven aforementioned ones, but simply standing alone, referred to often as Brahm consciousness, as Brahm, from the Sanskrit term Brahma, or to expand, Brahman, or to expand. So the question is curious to hear my description of collective consciousness, and if there is any interrelation with the seven states of consciousness as described by Maharishi. Well, the simple answer to that, and this will be also paying tribute to the way Maharishi Mahesh Yogi spoke about it, is very simple, and I'd like to keep us all on the same page, so I don't want to lose anyone. So collective state of consciousness is simply a sum total of individual states of consciousness. That's all. Just like you have a jar of basmati rice. Each of this grain of rice represents, let's say, individual state of affairs. But the whole jar with whatever, 10,000, 100,000 of the grains of rice would comprise this whole jar of basmati rice. Any other example you prefer, please feel free to use it. So collective state of consciousness is made out of some total of individual state of affairs of what takes place here in you and me. However, there is this interesting thing which you might have heard me often bringing into the focal point of attention, that although the collective state of consciousness is a sum total comprised of individual state of consciousness, where it can literally be applied to a family, a tribe, a nation, a whole country, a continent perhaps, you see, that what is then formed as a collective state of consciousness impacts in turn each and every one individual. So it's not a one-way affair, and it's not a passive kind of entity. That collective state of consciousness is not some kind of a sleepy genie made out of all the heartbeats of the individuals of this or that tribe. The collective state of consciousness here, it's consciousness, an active consciousness here. And this relationship between so-called individualized consciousness and collective consciousness in the dynamic tension of interaction. Collective consciousness impacts each individual in as much and up to a point when each and every individual exists at a certain level of consciousness and at the mercy of certain levels of consciousness he or she have reached in this lifetime to a given moment in time. With the expansion of consciousness, obviously, we have the capacity to rise above the level of collective consciousness. And there are many examples to that can be given from various fields of life, where so-and-so born in certain unprivileged circumstances where one can see almost no way out, one rises above these circumstances simply because one is able to rise by virtue of their ability to be more conscious in every way, whether the way they are displaying their talents in any particular area. But I don't want to limit that to only, let's say, some canonical examples of those who born on the periphery only to die in Paris, or some of the celebrities, let's say, who became known despite all the odds of their very humble origins. I want also to extend that simply to being born in a family where there's no interest, in a society, in school, university, where no one was influencing them, and yet they grew, they looked out, they've made and formed these connections. They, as it were able to bend the circumstances in their favor. So this is primal example of being able to overcome the limitations of, let's say, collective state of consciousness, which imposes its quality on an individual. And you asking here to see this interconnectedness with the way Maharishi has outlined the seventh state of consciousness. Well, it's very clear here in terms of with the growth and expansion of consciousness, individual become cosmic, just as Maharishi spoke about it. Individual grows beyond the boundaries of given family, tribe, beyond the boundaries of one's, let's say, personal story. Even still confined to the limitations of this body, to the limitations imposed by certain planetary um, karmic influences, which all of us are subject to, irrespective of who we are and where we are in our evolution, unless we reach the status where we can create universe sheer out of sheer desire to, we're not talking about this. We're talking about something applicable to you and I. So in this more applicable state of affairs, this is very clear that with the growth of consciousness, we can reach the status where collective consciousness no longer imposes its limitations upon us. We, in fact, begin to influence collective consciousness by virtue of greater conductivity that is taking place in this space-time phenomena. Something you may want to look in the book of Wayne Dyer, where he talked about it, how each individual whose levels of consciousness reached progressively, by the way, he utilized that same ladder that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi spoke about, the seven states of consciousness, how, let's say, individual who primarily deals and dwells at the level of mundane consciousness, subjected to only the rotating frequencies of the waking, dreaming, deep sleep, with some occasional transcendence given as a break during the deep sleep, but not much more than that, emits only that level of vibratory power. And with that, as it begins to grow, someone whose awareness reaches the status of transcendence, because they simply do that on a daily basis. The transcendental state of consciousness is the daily status. This is the daily. They exhume a very different level of energy and vibration. And so it goes. The greater the capacity to reflect that, the more conscious we are, the more we can influence the environment without us doing anything about it, without us thinking about it. In fact, it completely goes against that whole thing of trying to do something, trying to influence something. It happens automatically by virtue of its being second nature to where consciousness is. I trust this satisfies your curiosity. It comes to deep sleep now and death. Question on deep sleep and death. Straight to the question. I was wondering what your thoughts are on the difference between the deep sleep level of being and when we actually leave the body. In other words, die. In deep sleep, a more liberated state than death, or are they actually the same? Only in the former we are still anchored to the body. How does this tie into Kashmir Shaivism take on reincarnation? Deep sleep is not a more liberated state than death. I think it would be helpful to consider this slightly differently, simply because that what we experience in waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, in actuality, these are different wavelengths of the activity that our nervous system is subjected to. And indeed, it only affects our nervous system, neurophysiology. In other words, the consciousness itself is unaffected by comings and goings of these three relative states of consciousness. Therefore, tradition simply speaks of this. The fourth is where we truly, truly begin to understand and experience the flavor or the taste of the essence of who we are. So deep sleep is a simple reset. It's a reset where certain neurophysiological processes, if not for that reset, would begin to burn themselves out. So you may have heard me saying some times ago, like I used to repeat that deep sleep is a poor man's meditation. So in other words, deep sleep is just like a reset. If someone doesn't meditate, at least they have a deep sleep, because if not for the deep sleep, the system will not be able to function for too long. In deep sleep, there's no longer alternation between sympathetic and parasympathetic, no longer working of the left and right hemisphere. Everything is switched off. As simple as that. It's the turned off mode, not a sleep mode. So that turned off mode in itself acts as a reset. Some very subtle processes are intact. The nervous system, as it were, checks itself whilst we are in deep sleep. And the surface level of stress, whatever is accumulated there, tiredness, whatever needs to be repaired, cell reparation, by the way, neuroscientists will tell you the greatest cell reparation is taking place during the deep sleep. And this is why we cannot go without sleep. We have to sleep. Otherwise, we will not last. And when we speak about death, it's something else, even though sometimes one speaks of what it is like. It's references are given. Well, it's like going to sleep. It's like falling asleep. I'm not exactly sure here where the question is leading, in the sense of what is it really that you would like to know. But it's not the same. The deep sleep is not the same as death. So for the aforementioned reason, because in death, what we call death, there is a departure of prana. The prana dissolves its connection and resolves its connection with the organs of cognition. So the organs of cognition, aka what body is for here, are meant to be given back to the elements. So it did its job. It needs to now be recycled, simply given back to that great Mother Nature. She knows what to do with it. And the expressive potentiality, which are here, what the senses represent, for which sake the body is equipped with organs of cognition, are withdrawn with prana out whilst the body is still alive through particular pathways of energy where it, as it were, departs, leaves. You see? So portion or some quality of prana still remains in the body in order to decompose the corpse, decompose the body itself. But the senses are taken out. The senses, the prana takes the senses and leaves by taking all the senses out of the body which served its purpose and is here to be simply returned. So that's how I see it. I don't know if Kashmir Shaivism agrees with that, but that's my take on it. Now, the fifth question is reconciling the fullness of what is with the drive for collective awakening. A little bit of background. The crux of my question stems from growing feeling that everything is absolutely okay as it is, which is accompanied by a sense of despondency or inaction. I used to have such a strong drive to wholeheartedly serve others and make a positive impact on the world. But this has been fading in the gently growing realization of the beauty of what is already present in each moment. My action seems to not arise from wanting to bring about a change anymore, but from just enjoying the ride we are on. And with that comes less urgency and urge to act. It feels almost incompassionate to say this, but even the suffering and ignorance in the world often seem divine and okay as it is. So the question, with that view, what need is there for action or to bring about collective change or awakening when everything is already okay as it is? Is this just me trying to spiritually bypass the world and getting lost in fanciful mood making? Or is it a case that whatever action arises naturally out of this growing realization is itself what contributes to that collective transformation? Even if the action is simply enjoying a walk in nature or patiently cooking a beautiful dinner. Well, since we've mentioned Maharishi Mahesh Yogi with regard to the previous question, it goes to perhaps bring another reminder of a very short, sweet interaction of which I've heard in one of the tapes recorded, some of the recorded exchanges. So the questioner asked Maharishi, if everything as it is and everything as it should be, so why all this? Why do we all have to kind of meditate and, why do we have to do all these peacekeeping programs if all there is this and as it should be? What's the point? So Maharishi looked at the man and said, because this is also what we do is as it should be. So this is a response to your question, I feel, can be at least proceed from that place. Yes, we have this understanding that everything as it should be, everything as it is, or as you put it here, everything is absolutely okay as it is. Does that mean that we are absolved from doing what we do? Does it mean that we are absolved from carrying the portion of our responsibility? It is for you to work it out. My suggestion is to simply be honest always with what is rising. But if you don't know, do not hesitate to delegate that to the subtle state of affairs and ask that. You don't know what to do now. Before you were driven, before you had perhaps some ideas, maybe these ideas were quite strong and pronounced, how to save the world, or what your part in that whole scheme of saving the world, or making life better, or somehow bringing the qualitative changes. And this air has been taken out of there, it's deflated, naturally so, part and parcel of the process. I'm with you on that. You don't know what to do, delegate that to the universal consciousness. Ask your favorite deity, ask the aspect of the absolute, of the divine power. Guide me, tell me. You want the father figure, then, address that absolute, that awareness in that masculine form, whatever that might be, whatever the language allows you. You want more like asking from that place of asking the wisdom of the mother. Delegate that, ask that great Ma to guide you. Give me give me the insight, give me the sign. What am I supposed to do? If everything is okay, how am I here to be of greatest use? This is the honest way to go about this. And guess what? Even if the silence prevails for a long time and you don't have any answers, by sheer fact that you have delegated this as a question, will open up some form of energy where this will present itself to you in unfathomable ways of the God, as they say, and you may quickly find yourself in being greatly in need of some use, greatly in need of some assistance. I'm just saying. But yes, we should always check, keep a close check that we don't spiritually bypass and don't use any loops, being the non-dual loops or any tantric loops or any loops that gives us a quick kind of cop out of any situation that we are exempt from any responsibility. Everything is as it is, everything is okay. Well, if the question rises, means there is something. So yes, keep a close tap on that, keep a close attention to that. You see? Not in everyone it displays itself in the same manner. For someone, awakening may bring about very powerful waves of compassion, where one would simply feel the suffering, agony, and pain of others to such degree that they will feel them as their own. So they are unable to do anything else. They will be there and then plunged into the doing this, whatever the place and space and time would require, because that's what they would be asked, because that's what their heart is desires. With the mental, intellectual folk, with those kind of gyanis of the world, it's slightly more different. They all have that cool dude approach, often like know it all, figure it all out. So there is a greater propensity, a greater possibility for that, what you here address as a possibility for mood making and spiritual bypassing. Because it's in the nature of that. You see, knowledge is also, can be the greatest arrogance. Spiritual knowledge perhaps the greatest form of arrogance. If it makes us arrogant instead of humble, if it makes us completely devoid of feelings for others, for the underdog, for those in need, that something is not quite there. That's my personal understanding. I don't buy these Gyanis who seen it all, done it all, vacantly staring in the void and just twiddling their thumb before the body disintegrates. To me, this is a boring state of affairs. Always was and always will be. Okay, I'd rather do something else, quite frankly. But I could be wrong, you see. Who am I to say that this is the way? You need to find what it is you are here doing and let that tapas still remain alive, intact. Let's not blow on the flame. Let's not do all this nirvana kind of thing. No. So enjoy the phase of that detachment. Enjoy that phase. Enjoy the phase when everything is okay. Nobody said no. Go through that phase. It's still the phase of dismantling, if you truly want to know. Once you are dismantled enough, something else will rise. There'll be enough purity in the container when something can be poured into it, where you'd be surprised where it all came from. In the meantime, let us remain humble. So that takes us to the making of decisions as the sixth question. Short background and longer questions. A week ago, I made the decision that I have postponed making for a couple of years that is connected to my family life. All these years, I was waiting for clarity, some insights, revelation. But the decision I have made came suddenly, almost abruptly, with no prior thinking. So my questions are these. First set of questions. All there is Shiva. So do we only have a sense that we make decisions, but in reality, we do not? In brackets, Swami Lakshmanju made a difference between action performed by an individual soul and act, will of God. But can such kind of differentiation only seen by self-realized human beings? Yet we make decisions every day. Is it possible to at least sense the difference? Okay, let's continue with the questions from this lady so that maybe we can give it an overview. Do our actions in different states of consciousness after Kundalini awakening become more aligned with universal laws and with the essence of who we truly are? Is the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, non-doing, principle of conduct, only for accomplished human beings? Or is it total surrender to the will of Shiva, or both, or something else altogether? Is it possible to live the highest dharmic life at all without opening our hearts fully for truth and love? Well, the last question is very easy to answer. No, it's not possible to live the highest dharmic life unless our heart is fully opened for truth and love, because these are interchangeable realities. Truth, love, beauty can be spoken of interchangeably. So unless our heart is truly opened in a sense that it then becomes a self-revealing power or self-revealing powers of what we truly are, then how can we speak of living highest dharmic life if that's what the highest dharmic life represents, is to live it from the place where that is fully expressed? So that part is rather simple. With regard to these actions, individual versus actions that are guided by the hand of God, so to speak, because I can see that underlying here, who makes these decisions, and you gave in your background this how it took you 2 years, and then suddenly the decision was made on a spur of the moment. So, what decisions do we make on our own, and what decisions are being made on our behalf? This is kind of connects us to what we spoke a little bit earlier today with regard to that, how there are different views and perspectives in terms of what constitutes this individual. There are some allowances given in certain traditions that individual is divine, the soul is divine, but it is still not the full expression of the absolute. It's only, let's say, a certain quality, a certain degree, a certain kind of way that somehow that becomes possible for this individual to have then a connection, which is that then a responsibility of that individual to reestablish that connection to the source. This is also a formidable topic of many non-dual teachings, as well as religious truths. Like in Islam, for example, this is very much, it's a monoistic religion, but it is a responsibility of a seeker to return to the glory and to the light of God. It is a responsibility. And at the same time, with the axioms being expressed so clearly, there are these helpful also analogies given immediately that the God draws those he loves most closer to him. So it's kind of like, I don't know, I forgot whether this is from the Hadith or is this is a part of the Quran. I'm not a scholar on the topic, but this kind of goes here. You see, there's this connection. On one hand, it's a one-way responsibility. Responsibility is squarely on us to find way to go, to align to the light. And then on the other hand, that there is this God draws closer to him those he loves. So it's a kind of already, this is not just a one-way affair. So we are not just here dwelling in the darkness, as it were, with the Supreme completely oblivious to what we are, who we are. And then there are other perspectives that, in addition, marrying these two, that the grace itself is won by those who are open their heart for that grace to enter. So you see, you need to make out of all these various, perhaps at times differently sounding truths, what will make most sense for you now. It's no point for me to tell you, from non-dual perspective, from the Advaita perspective, there is this absolutism. There's no you, no me. There's only Shiva. There's nobody thinks here. Everything is thought for you. Everything is decided for you. How you live your life, what you eat, whom you marry, whom you divorce, whom you bear as children, whether they stay, whether they go, whether they marry in turn, where you will live, how you will live, all decided. Nothing you can do about it. Yes, there is this perspective, and there is a lot of truth to that. And yet, I want to bring to our attention here that what is a common sense and applicability of spiritual truth to how we live life. Otherwise, we might end up violating the very premises of that supreme will that is granted to us. So the will is the most precious asset we have. Let me repeat myself and maybe reiterate this. It's very, very important. Tantrically speaking, you remember, right? This, if you might have come across this as reading on Tantra or taking any courses or reading on your own, that Tantra deals with this concept of the Shiva as the absolute, and that absolute is blissful by nature. So this Shiva right? This Shiva, Ananda, Iksha Kriya, no, Iksha Jnana Kriya. So this absolute swelled with bliss, with pure delight of its own, has the will, knowledge, and action. And these are the five primary phases and five primary um, forces that are in operation all the time. And particularly the three, the will, knowledge, and action. It begins with the will. Everything that we do, which inevitably will translate into action, begins at the level of the will. Remember that English saying, when there is a will, there is a way. Let's not give it up too prematurely. Assigning everything to the absolute does not somehow obliterates the right and the need for us to act as responsible beings here. This, I feel, is an important message of adjustment that needs to be brought from time to time. As we also internally, in a very intimate manner, truly understand that everything is guided by the divine will only. And yet, it is not granted that we are living the divine will. You see, this is why I don't want mix apples and pears and bring this highest teaching into the valley of life, and somehow we begin to exchange it and make and turn it into fool's gold. You see, one thing is knowing in your heart that everything is predetermined by the supreme authority, and another is to still act when someone in need needs your attention, needs your help, needs your intervention, when something needs to be said rather than keeping it quiet, when it is better to keep quiet rather than blurring around all the time, when, yes, as you have said here rightly, we constantly make decisions on a daily basis. So let us be very, very also down to earth and practical with regard to that. When it comes to the existential state of affairs, when it comes to the essence of who we are, what we are, why we're here, yes, let's delegate everything to one and the only, and let be the willing instruments, and let us, as it were, then say, let thy will be done. But in the meantime, let us be also active and proactive and do what needs to be done, simply because this is part and parcel of being human, you see? And that's not at all promulgating or prolonging ignorance. It's living life from the level of respective laws that are operable at the respective level of creation. So there is an absolute will, but there are also what I have just pointed out and brought this as a simple reminder that yes, let thy will be done, but whatever is required from me, whatever I have to be in charge of, let that not be somehow brushed asunder, and I'm here to rise to the occasion, and I'm here and I can carry my load. I can keep my stick to help to carry that mountain Vrindavan, to help Krishna to carry the burden. I do my little thing here, okay, and I sleep well. So ponder on that. See what it leaves you with. But do not somehow waste time on this. Whom does it belong to? Does it have to be awakened or accomplished? No. Just know that individual will always subordinate to the will of the creator, just as in that what we just outlined as this Shiva, Ananda, Iksha, Jnana Kriya. So this clarity of understanding that will is required, knowing or knowledge of how, and the action taken. So whatever we do, whatever our likes, whatever we go about our daily life with whatever needs to be done, if it's helpful to assign it all to the absolute, to the divine, simply because it makes the load lighter, why not? Do just that. Delegate all that. And yet, whenever the push comes to the shove and you need to make a decision, you have to make that decision. And if you are dwelling on a status quo, knowing very well that you are incapable of making the decision, you can, of course, delegate that also to the divine power. But you will still be the one who will make that decision, you see? So chicken and egg story here. And you are the only one who can grok it. So I hope it becomes clearer now. It certainly does, trust me. It certainly does, and just becomes natural. We no longer dwell on this anymore. We could illustrate this, of course, with the samples and examples from the Bhagavad Gita, right? Which will tie both questions, the question that you just asked with the question that was asked before, right? Reconciliation of that fullness, right? Everything is okay, so what they left to do? We can bring this reminder of the what is action, what is inaction. Even wise are bewildered there, as the verse of the Bhagavad Gita goes. The wise knows that one does not act at all. And the wise also knows that there is a different kind of actions. There's action in inaction, and there is inaction in action. Wise, knowing that, remain unattached. These are great, profound reminders of the nature of the action, which is, of course, inevitably also linked to the will, because these actions cannot exist unless there is a will in the first place. So these reminders are profound reminders that when we act, we do not act at all. When we're not acting at all, this cannot be called complete inactivity. There is still another kind of action, as the verses of the Gita go. So perhaps we can turn now to the following up question. And that is Kundalini and re-traumatization. I didn't even know such word exists. Thank you for adding to my vocabulary. I should certainly take that on board. Quite a bit of a background and a very simple question. Sip some tea. I experienced the Kundalini awakening 7 years ago, followed by years of deep, both shocking and healing, confrontation of traumatic structures in body and mind. At some point, I got kind of stuck in the process, and I would say re-traumatization happened. After 2 years of staying in this energy on my own, I started a relationship with 2 men, one after another, who were not able or willing to take the risk to surrender, but used my trust and surrender, which was destroying for me. Even yoga and holotropic breathing didn't help me to find a way back to healing or through trauma. I fell back into traumatic structures and lost my power, love, which was and is very painful, also because it feels like I lost something very precious. I feel very desperate. Question: is there anything you can say to this? Well, what can I say other than, and also based on the fact that um, even though some background is given, very little background of how do you manage yourself. Manage in the sense of what do you do to balance the books when it comes to your well-being, when it comes to your evolutionary unfoldment. You had this awakening 7 years ago, which you say you experienced the Kundalini awakening 7 years ago, followed by a year of deep, shocking healing, confrontation, and all these traumatic structures in body mind. Are you following some methodologies? Are you doing anything? Is there a teacher? Are you attending some gatherings, retreats? Are you doing any work on yourself? Entering relationship with one man after another, there's nothing new about that. We know that that's what we do in life. We go from one relationship to another. It's a part and parcel of pulse juices in the body. So this is, how it then pan itself out. It's all down to a lot of things. So it's not for me to comment, you see. I don't want to make any guesses, nor do I want to kind of play here a psyche. So nothing much I can really say about this, except that I would encourage you to begin some work on yourself. You said that even yoga, holotropic breathing, didn't help. But what yoga? It's a bit vague, you see. And when it's vague, it's not that easy to begin to give precise suggestions here, because I'm not here to prescribe you what to do. I'm only to reflect what is already there, known deep in the recesses of your being. This is my job. Sometimes I can tweak, I can point out this and that. So you want to know more? You want to find your way to reclaim all this? You're welcome to begin to take our programs. Absolutely. This is like why am I not gonna start pretending that only this format of communication is the answer to the sometimes very, very pertinent questions in life? No. Join our programs. Start with those online, come to live programs, and you'll kiss goodbye all this enchilada of this and that, comings and goings. Certainly you will know clear of what you want from your life and how to go about your relationships, and that desperation may be exchanged for something much more positive. But as it is, it's very difficult to give this kind of assessments just based on the background. When there is a question, you see, whenever someone formulates a question, because everything is so interconnected, when question comes from the core of your being, when it's sincere and honest, it contains answer. It makes this job so much more precise. Yes, it makes it easy for someone like who is holding space and reflecting it back. It makes it almost spontaneous, natural. But for me to comment, I'm not a commenter, you see. So I feel for you, but please find in yourself to take it into your hands and take this, what you now shared here, onto a qualitatively different level. That's all there is, really. Okay. And there's a very short question with no background entitled Hardcore Awakening. For some people, the path of consciousness seems relatively easy in comparison to the spontaneous Kundalini awakening. I am personally witnessing what I would term debilitating via the Kundalini route. It's hardcore. Do you feel that some people need this hard ride more than others? I think, to be fair, absolutely every true awakening is a hardcore. Okay, so that's really, I mean, I wouldn't use that such term personally, but since it's already there in your question, uh, every true awakening, everything true is a hardcore. You see, everything true is a hardcore. So it's a matter of language, maybe here, right? There's certain words that are meant to position us in a certain way that we know what we're dealing with. So first of all, I want to reassure you that you are not here to be punished. Everyone who goes through authentic, true awakening goes through a lot of the stuff that could be summarized and summoned, as you did here, as that hard core. Every true awakening is that. Do I feel that some people need this hard ride more than others? I don't think anymore in these terms, that someone needs a more difficult ride than others. I don't think that there is unfairness or fairness when it comes to these matters. It should be seen more from the place of how everything is interconnected, and how awakening, in terms of how it will begin to pan itself out at the expense of longevity of our organism, that is, its impact on the nervous system, on neurophysiology at large, to a great degree depends on what we've been doing with these bodies, what habits we have accumulated, how much abuse has taken place already, or how much abuse we have done on our body, on our nervous system, on our neurophysiology, unawareingly, of course, not because we knew better and somehow thought, no, well, who cares? So, and yet, some people have a more difficult ride, it's true, and others seems to have it smoother. But read any spiritual autobiography out there. I yet to meet one or read to one spiritual autobiography where the awakening is spoken of in terms of as a walk in the park. Just haven't come across. So that is truly not my experience. Nor that I have ever heard that someone had it easy. Perhaps in some traditions, among some beings, it's never spoken. Maybe when you're sitting at the feet of the great master, maybe if your karma is so pure that you were privileged enough to grow up in a family where the knowledge is there, when there is this family connection, DNA connection, where all this knowledge is somehow being safeguarded, preserved, yes, certainly for them it's easier. For the rest of us, is a hardcore, man. So, I don't know your gender identity, I'm just saying. Next one is orgasm of the heart. A couple of summers ago, I experienced an orgasm whilst meditating, which I believe was the start of my Kundalini awakening. Several months later, I worked with a teacher who taught me techniques that further expand my awakening. I have taken the Samadhi and Seeing Through the Heart courses. I began to wonder if the awakening was occurring in the Vajranadi. I have had full body blissful experiences as well as what I can only describe as an orgasm of the heart. It feels perplexing that I'm often transported to what I can only describe as a spiritual sexual connection with the divine. It is visual, palpable, and a full body experience. Question: do you have some guidance and sage wisdom about the ultimate reality of this experience, as well as if I'm off course? I presume that if there is anything wrong in the way what you're experiencing and what you're going through. So first of all, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, and it's not off at all. Um, Moreover, it's a matter of cultural, educational, and perhaps also emotional preference of how we speak and how we relate to these matters. And some of us will be more prompted to relate to these experiences in a different manner than you did here. And I feel with great authenticity and honesty. And when you say something like this here, that it feels perplexing that I am often transported to what I can only describe as a spiritual, sexual connection with the divine. It is visual, palpable, and a full body experience. Well, you know that in my understanding, a true union, a true communion with the divine is on par with what you have described. It is a summation of all experiences, and it is also can be spoken of in terms of alluringly erotic, coitus-like, copulation-like, sexual union-like. And various traditions did not beat about the bush, even in terms of the iconographic representation of that communion. It is here and now, with layers of often suspicion and religious inheritance and rooted in indoctrination, where the body was denied as the experience, when the body was seen as the result of fall, a result of sin. Body is something was meant to be, um, well, the body itself was considered to be the repository of all that what is sinful, undesirable, something which needs to be completely and utterly discarded in order to have this communion. But other traditions, certainly traditions born in Indian subcontinent and that have existed for millennia, known that there is this connection. And you can find that, we can find these traces, of course, in the Occident as well. We shouldn't deny that. We can find this. We can find these allusions and beautiful passages um, left by the mystics of this or that lineage, of this or that tradition, even within the Christianity, whether they came from female or male, seekers, lovers, and that connection of lover and the beloved has that erotic flavor. I would go further and say that as far as certain understanding, all experiences, all, absolutely all, without exception, are erotic in essence if we are to understand what Eros here represents. So, why would then the spiritual breakthrough would be different? Why would then the union that one experiencing with the divine be different? Contrary to that, it would be the epitome of that. But again, it's in the culture, in the language, in the sensibility of how we choose to relate about this. So some perhaps prefer to dress this in post factum in a more cerebral manner, but the visceral nature of what you speak here is indeed somatic. It takes the entire cellular structure. It is orgasmic in every sense. So you are not off the course. All what you have related here is very, very sincere and, as far as I understand, spot on. Now, world events and the spiritual path. Is a quite a long background. I will try to read it quickly. On my spiritual path, I encountered the idea that it is useless to engage with the world because what has to change is the individual, and only through the transformation of individuals can the world change. There was the hint that trying to help the world is an ego movement, the ego that deludes itself, believing that it is that and doing the actions. However, the Indian guru Sri Sri Ananda Murti said that nothing happens in the material sphere without applying some force. I felt these words correspond to my experience. I wouldn't like to stay silent with the lies, the subtle violence, and the manipulations that are bringing the world to robotization, complete control of people's lives, dehumanization, and so on. I wouldn't want to feel the reproaches of my daughter in the future. Why didn't you do anything to try to stop this? Why didn't you just sit in meditation? Why did you just sit in meditation with closed eyes, dedicating yourself only to your peace and joy? At the same time, I often feel the impotence, the powerlessness, and also that interest in world happenings takes away part of my energy and well-being. Question. I trust that the world is going to transform after a period of great bad events into a better place to live and to love. But in the meantime, it is better just to keep our vibrations high and dedicate ourselves to light and love, as a lot of channeling would suggest. The impulse to courage to speak the truth to the world is just a useless illusion, or is there room for it in the path? What do you feel? Well, I feel that what you speak and what you share here belongs to that classical dilemma, classical existential dilemma that many sincere seekers encounter and at some point go through. Um, the angle may be taken slightly differently. Maybe with some, it's more a matter of, is what I do brings any good? How do I know that I'm not wasting my time? Wouldn't my contribution be more impactful if I were to go and engage in some meretricious actions actually on the ground, and so forth? How can I justify? How do I know that what I do on the meditation mat, a pillow cushion, actually brings high vibrations? All this comes only because we haven't touched that level within ourselves when we know without shadow of a doubt that that's what it is. You see? So it's not that I'm saying that somehow you haven't reached high enough level. It's not up to me to say that. What I'm saying is simply suggesting that that tender phase that you perhaps in and what you're sharing belongs to that ashramic phase, to that often spoken of as, sometimes I refer to it as a quarantine phase when you should reduce your exposure to news, reduce your exposure to external phenomena in terms of what is out there in the world, simply because you are hatching, right? You're sitting. There has to be a certain temperature, certain stillness, steadiness have to be there. But what happens when this what reveals itself, and it does reveal itself, and certainly will reveal itself to you, becomes the greatest source of confidence and removes all the doubts. Nobody can remove these doubts. I can only encourage you, reassure you now, to give you this nudge to kind of, um, yeah, as the father, I will tell you, yes, all your concerns are legitimate. What children can tell us, you just put it softly. They can say that in a much more demanding and reprimanding manner. Where have we been? Why the world is turned to the what it is turning itself right now? How come we didn't act on time? And yet, only when that power revealed itself within, you know without any shadow of a doubt that what you do here, right now, where you are, has a tremendous impact. Every minute movement of your heart, every movement of where you are able to remain fully present amidst of anything that tries to take you out of that, is that how that power displays itself. From something as dramatic and spectacular as actually feeling the power. This is a very well known feeling that power, that visceral power that is at the core of who we are. It's not some kind of psychological makeup, it's not some kind of exercise. It's a result of an expansion of consciousness and clearing of the pathways of energy where channels are clear enough, then nothing abstract itself. When we become in the presence of our own light, extraordinary power is revealed within. And that extraordinary power doesn't need confirmation of anyone. It doesn't need to be given approval. Yes, maybe sometimes, as tradition goes, this can be related, and the spiritual perceptor will nod his head or her head, will tap on the shoulder, or simply say yes, and that would legitimize that. But it could be to the degree when it answers all the gazillion of questions at once. When that power reveals itself, then you are ready to be exposed to anything. Anything. To devil himself or any fallen angels or any demons or any structures are there to be confronted in a manner of face-off. It's as simple as that, because the work doesn't stop there. The unfoldment of consciousness continues until total reabsorption of all powers into the heart of the void of yourself. But then everything you say has a different quality as well, you see? So if you feel like now preserving the energy, literally preserving, do not feel you need to justify that. This is the encouragement, if you need one today, so that not to think in advance of what our children will throw against us that we haven't done. Just be fully present to what is unfolding within you right now, because that's is the only place that conceals that power. Meandering and wandering of the mental tendencies. Meandering and the wandering, that's what still there doesn't allow that power to truly speak itself and fill the heart with that what the heart is known as not of faint-hearted kind. You see? Which takes us now to collective karma or catalyst of change. In these times of great change, where supposedly we have already crossed all the tipping points, I have heard you talk about the quicksilver like nature of consciousness. In my imagination, I see these monolithic and complex structures shifting in a kaleidoscopic manner amidst the potentially devastating circumstances the world will inevitably have to face in the coming decades and centuries. Questions. Is this period of deep and increasing popularization of in the collective? No, sorry, let me start again. In this period of deep and increasing polarization in the collective, which we are witnessing, in itself a kind of catalyst that provides the perfect container in which vast amount of energy comes together to transmute into something qualitatively new altogether. Is this how collective awakening happens on a mass scale? Is what we are doing, for example, meditating together and bringing greater coherence and harmony, in effect preparing the ground, bringing forth the potential quicksilver-like shifts in the collective, and planting the seeds for the next cycle to come? Or is it the karma of the collective playing itself out without the grand underlying narrative of a mass awakening process? Is this just what happens in the Kali Yuga? Can we ever know from a limited perspective? It's tempting to just simply say yes to everything you wrote. Just yes, 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 that's what it is. Yes, that's how it is. It's tempting. It's tempting to simply say yes to this whole set of questions as you have built it, and very coherently, very clearly, and very aptly. At the same time, I want to simply bring your attention to the core of what you need to always have at the epicenter, where clarity is a result of seeing this for what it is. All this, what we speak of now, with regard to what you have shared here, all you need to understand is that I am. That's the greatest mantra. That's why we work with breath, because also breathing is that reminder, and that opens these vast, subtle vistas, right? The connection of the Soham and the Aham, and what the Aham represents here. I am. So all in all circumstances, it all falls back onto itself. So the understanding that I am the working universe, I am the totality, whether I'm drinking tea in peace and savoring beauty in this very moment, the whole entire universe is in a repose, experiencing these qualities. The whole entire universe. Whenever you're out of whack, whenever you are destabilized, if you are out of whack deeper than at the surface level, then the whole entire universe is momentarily experiencing this havoc. So this is what I want to turn your attention to rather. So this whole thing about, yes, we speak of collective consciousness, the whole point, the whole title of this, and what we talked in Zurich, which I have given the announcement at the start of the gathering. Yes. So as I said, it's tempting to say yes. But before I say yes to all this, what you have shared here, the increased polarization in itself here is, in a way, tantalizing to what is happening at a given moment in time, because the powers need to take respective arrangements, and everyone is pulled accordingly. Everyone takes their place in the given set of circumstances in the field. Call it battlefield, or just call it the field. But it comes from the primal understanding that I am. Everything is. So first, our rule of thumb understanding is here is that before mass awakening, before anything of the kind, whether this is true or not, in me, universe is safe. In me, everything is safe. Rest, let it play itself out. Let the cosmic drama play itself out. In me, it's safe. So that's the primal understanding. You see, this is therefore walking universe here serves as that reminder. So you may feel, you or anyone feel limited, restricted in whatever way, in whichever way, and yet at the very same time, you are unlimited, unbounded in your essential qualities, and it is available to you. And that's where the decisions are always made. And this is where the light always wins. Light can penetrate darkness. Darkness cannot penetrate light. When we speak about this, let's say, axiomatic matters. So otherwise, yes, everything is now acting as a catalyst. So it's no longer in the future. No longer we're planting seeds. No. In fact, this is the seeds were planted. We're harvesting now what has been planted. You see? It's something else. It's a different ball game now. So it's not going to be easy, the transition. But we are here to see the light because we are light. And we're here to project that for the seventh generation, for our daughters and granddaughters and grand-granddaughters and sons, for them to be able to reap these fruits of our actions right now, because we did the right thing. We did the right thing. We didn't gamble. You see? We didn't gamble. We sat.
Lucinda Enefort W. Gamble or Gamble was a teacher and civic leader in Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, right.
Would you like to hear more?
Thank you. That was, you see, even my Siri couldn't contain itself. So that. And now we come to the 12th question, living with Kriyas. Very short one. It seems like we have a couple of questions in a row about that. I've been experiencing Kriyas since 2003. I can let them go ahead any time and place and stop them just the same. Question: what is your point of view on integrating them into one's life and the benefit you perceive from doing that? Okay, well, this question belongs to classical questions often asked in live events, in online events for the past several years. And we have given a great coverage of this. So I will give a short response because there is also a following up question, a more specific one on Kriyas. But I would encourage you to look up the recordings here on YouTube with the title Kriyas. You can simply put my name and the word Kriyas, and several clips will come up where we dealt with that from various angles and gone into great length of what you're asking here. But just to say now, to honor your question on the occasion of its being here read, my point of view, my understanding of integrating the Kriyas into your life, and the benefit, well, first of all, everyone understands that these are involuntary, spontaneous movements. So it's not something that we do. They are part and parcel of the process of greater activation of prana and awakening and expansion of Kundalini Shakti. So therefore, it is not something that we can put a halt on. It will be undesirable. So already from that point of view, we cannot speak about whether we have a choice or not, because the question is built in such way that it's not about my point of view or what I think about that. It's like you find these grains of wisdom throughout many traditions where that was spoken with precision, but also not publicized and did not make it into a social media sharing of the ancients. But today we know this is more and more and more common. So people asked often, when would this Kriya subside? How long would they take? And so forth. And some Kriyas will never subside. What do I mean by that? Is that there will always be some movements in the body. And so one need to be prepared, embrace this and be ready. And that is very beneficial because Kriyas free the body from accumulated stress. Most of the Kriyas are that. Body throwing, the impositions, and the, let's say, the basic level of what the Kriyas are in terms of their provenance is because there is a great agility now, and the nervous system begins to free itself from the accumulated impressions, both physical, psychic, mental, emotional, and so forth. And as it begins to free itself, it happens often through the instrumentality or through the agency of the what we then dub as involuntary, spontaneous movements, kriyas. Not the kriyas that we do, as in some spiritual movements. The word kriya means something else because they are voluntarily. In this work, we speak of them as involuntary kriyas. So, involuntary kriyas are a response of the nervous system freeing itself from accumulated impressions, stresses, and what nervous system is better off without. In addition, kriyas also can be expression of the strengthening of the pranic field. So that includes the full gamut of yogic asanas, mudras, pranayamas, bandhas, mudras, all that what belongs to the rich vocabulary of yogic uh, methodologies spontaneously take place. All forms of yoga, in fact, can take place when Kundalini is active and awakened and does its job. So, integrating them into one's life, we can turn that around and say it differently. We become greater integrated to live this life because the Kriyas are now doing the job, you see? So it's not like us integrating the Kriyas. Turn it around, and then you will see the silver lining, then you will see the greater reality of what is happening. And then also, you know, hopefully it does not pose any psychological um, limitations, as sometimes people feel like, they feel that this is not normal. Somehow this is something weird, something I don't want to have kriyas, particularly when it comes to relationships and when it comes to areas where we feel uh, ashamed of these displays. So if this is not the case, then you are in a great place. And then the following up question is kriyas or entities. So a bit of a background. I have been experiencing very intense kriyas for 3 years now. My body seems to want to shake the old energy off 24/7. and I feel like I'm losing control over my body. These Kriyas don't bring me joy or bliss, but often feel devastated to see this is not getting any better, but even more intense. I also spit out some words like die, kill you, please love me, and please spare me, and curse words during Kriyas which are not from my mind. This make me worried if I'm possessed or something. When I learned about Kriyas, I understood it as the old energy structure leaving the body. But for me, this energy sometimes feels like some kind of entities that don't want to leave my body. So every day feels like a battle between me and them. I'm also afraid of losing the ability to focus and think clearly, which I have difficulties with right now. All I want is to have a better understanding of what's going on with me and if there is any way to make this process more gentle. Could you give me some advice? And a practical question. My breath works strangely. It seems like I don't breathe much through my nose. It's very subtle. Should I try to breathe more deeply? If I'm consciously trying to breathe more, my body usually starts doing kriyas. So I don't know what to do. So the first response to this would be, you see that you need to have a structured approach to this. Structured. Sadhana, that's what sadhana is. Sadhana is something which supports. Sadhana which offers support. When one has sadhana and when one is established in sadhana, and when sadhana becomes automatic, that's how it works in that order, right? First, there's discipline, and one becomes established in sadhana, and then sadhana becomes automatic. It becomes second nature. The same thing as what you do every day, just to keep clean, shower, brush your teeth, do this, that. All these things are normal, natural. We don't trumpet about. We don't talk it as like some kind of special procedure. No. So sadhana has to be that, and then it becomes spontaneous through the grace that begins to descend. And that's my first response is that I don't know, there's nothing in your background that says anything. If you've been engaged in any practices, if you have done any practices, if you have sat with teachers, if you have done any work, but that's what you need to do. You see, when this process begins like that, it needs to have structure, because there is something about the nature of the kriyas. They work and they need to work, and if you're given them time, then you can go about your daily life outside of the times of your sittings, and when you give yourself to the expressiveness of what needs to work itself out. And some of what you put, what you have given in the background, it is true. Yes, it is what's happening. The kriyas are the body shaking off accumulated stress. You didn't put it this way, but like just rephrasing so as to give it greater clarity for everyone who listens right now, watches this and listens. So that's first thing. Second, you need to understand that it's the psychological climate is very important. Clarity of understanding brings about the psychological clarity. I mean, clarity of understanding brings about psychological um, comfort, because up until we feel that something odd, weird is happening, it takes me, it like took my life over. Now I'm a mess. Now I'm a wreck. Now I'm this and that. Nothing good can come out of that. So if you were to belong to some kind of yogic practices, right? If you were to belong to some kind of let's say, order of this or that, secret order of practitioners, right? And this process is in you, you would be celebrating, you see, because that's now the Holy Spirit speaks through you. The powers are now, the power is awakened, it's manifesting itself, so there will be a lot to celebrate. The whole psychological predisposition is different. You'll be much more willing to put up and go through this because that's what you desire. And you know that you cannot without this. You see, these are the preliminary phases before the integration of all that, you see? So in a way, you see how what I'm trying to bring to your attention and to everyone else, it's how predisposed we are. If our life was, quiet and this and that, we were pursuing our stuff, suddenly awakening, let's say, happened. And suddenly Kriyas kicked in. And suddenly we are all over the place. Of course, it feels like a major disruption. We're clueless. It's like, what is happening? What happened to my life? Whereas if we were already in pursuit of that spiritual evolution, already understanding that this is part and parcel of the process of the homecoming, the process of reclaiming that what is our essence, then we will have a very different attitude. You see? The attitude will be that of the spiritual warrior, a, a courageous attitude. I'm willing to go through that. I will go through that. I will pull through. I'll give my best. I'll give my all. You see? I'll take care of the body. I'll do what needs to be done. But if we just haphazardly, like, okay, when is it going to stop? Or what am I supposed to do? How can I go about this? You see? So seek knowledge, seek understanding. Good you brought this question. You need to have a proper spiritual practice established. So therefore, you need to attend some programs with qualified teachers who will give you that structured approach, which also you will learn how to meditate properly and how to integrate this, what's going on right now, into your daily life, even if that sounds a little bit in contradiction with what I just said in the question prior to that it's the other way around. Regarding the breathing, I'm not sure what you mean by when you say here that it seems like I don't breathe much through my nose. Does it mean that you breathe through your mouth? It's best to breathe through the nose, not through the mouth. Particularly when we inhale. It's not good to inhale through the mouth unless one is engaged in specific forms of pranayamas. Otherwise, best to breathe through the nose. Don't try to breathe more deeply or this or that. When you learn certain meditative practices which utilizes awareness of the breath, you will see how simple that is to practice. And even if the Kriyas will come up, you will be able to do the seating, even with the Kriyas. So when you come out of the seating, there is a less propensity for the body to move here and there when you are engaged in some other activities. You see? So this is my most immediate suggestion to you. And the final question from the pre-submitted ones, the release of blocked energy. A background first. After realization some years ago, the energy in my body started to rise. My heart started to burn with love, and on top of my head, it felt like I was being sucked into an airplane rotor. I was about to break through this blockage, and it felt like I was waking up from this dream of life. All this happened in just a few seconds, and I was simply shocked. I was not yet ready to die. This felt much like the end, and was stuck with I cannot. and the energy stopped moving. I attended your immersion event in Vienna. The stillness, peace, and detachment I felt during the meditations was something I never had experienced before, and also the Kriyas that happened to me were very intense. Question: what happens when the energy rushes through the top of the head? In one of your videos, you talked about Ganapati Muni, the disciple of Ramana Maharshi, whose energy started to break through the top of his head. You even said that his head started to smoke because of this intensity of the energy. What happens when this enormous energy sucks into one reality? Sucks one into reality. Will I be able to still be in my body and live life, or do people die in the previous life? Okay, so first of all, you don't need to worry about these drastic examples of Ganapati Muni, who had that breaking of the skull, kind of rising of Kundalini. It's extremely rare. And I mean, it's so rare that I haven't come across except one time. And that's where the question, my response to the question many, many years ago, I think it's like about 10-year-old video at least that you're referring to. So the energy is supposed to rise, and the experience of the rising of the energy going through the head is a natural phenomena. So if you understand that it's not that your life force will be sucked out of your body and you will perish here, this is not the case. Okay. In fact, even if you would have liked to do that, it's very difficult to do. Very difficult, nearly impossible. It's a very different thing to leave the body, live consciously through samadhi, the kind of like exit some yogis prefer and facilitate. It's not going to happen just to someone like yourself. So I would just reassure you to be released of these worries. Okay. But the sensations that you have described here, that your heart started to burn with love, and on the top of your head, it felt like being sucked into airplane rotor. Not uncommon at all. You get used to them, and the intensity usually one-off. Certainly when you go through a phase and it becomes a thing of the past, it's not like you are constantly being given to these experiences. What I'm glad to read is your feedback and from what you have experienced in a live event in Vienna, that stillness, peace, detachment that you felt during the meditations. That's what's important, you see? So the intensity of Kriya is nothing to worry about either. You've heard enough about it. We've discussed, we've talked about it. At all live events, we talk about it. So if the main question was what happens when the energy rushes through the top of the head, you shouldn't worry about it. As I said, the drastic example of the disciple of Ramana Maharshi was to illustrate the rarity of that event. And it's so uncommon that we don't bring this into a curriculum as a kind of a worry here to warn those who go through the process that this is something that might happen. So the chance one in I don't know how many millions, so I wouldn't even really consider it as a possibility. And maybe going back quickly before glancing, if we have any questions here, just quickly on the chat, going back to the previous question about the Kriyas and entities. Yes, that's exactly how it feels. So just to reassure you, the previous questioner, that as if we are being possessed and the spitting out, the spinning out of all that stuff, all these accumulated psychic impressions, very often accompanied by all that stuff that we begin to shout out, which, like, system begin to expel itself. And it's not uncommon either. I've heard people screaming, saying things that they would never, very unlikely say in any other circumstances, but that's what it is. So there's nothing to really worry about, you see. It's not that you are possessed by some entities. The whole theme of possession is a big one, like, if you want, we can talk about it some other time. We're always possessed by this or that quality. No one here given a free ride. No one here is not possessed. We all are possessed, but possessed in a way, in degree, and manner which we are not aware. But being possessed willingly, that's the skills. Giving oneself, you see, into possession, that's what really perhaps this is all about. But as I said, it's a different topic. So I'm just glancing at the chat now to see if there are any last minute questions before we wrap it up. We've been at it now for quite some times. So I don't know if you have come across. Okay, I'm just going to respond as soon as I see something, right? The spontaneous kriyas and mudras that are born of our experiences, are these to be shared with others? Will that assist in raising our collective vibrations? Not necessarily. Be careful whom you share this with. In a spiritual family, among the initiated, so to speak, those who understand, you will receive great support, you will receive encouragement, and it will feel great. But if you share it with even some of your old contacts, even family members, old friends who do not understand that, you might receive a very ambivalent response, you see, with perhaps a suggestion to check yourself up. So be discriminate about it. Be very, very aware that this is deemed precious phenomena. And though it becomes more and more commonplace, it's far from being an acceptable part of how we understand what the awakening really pertains. You see, woke culture, like awakening, the words are so used today in so many different ways that awakening sometimes means simply people realize something and they speak about it. Okay, this is an awakening. There's a mental shift, mental realization, and people already consider this to be the real awakening. See, so again, in the language. So in other words, be discriminate with whom you share. So any other questions here? Is it possible that Kundalini goes down the spine after it awakened in the heart by skipping lower centers? I feel like it's going down so it is rise, so as to rise properly. Yes, awakening can go down. I mean, the Kundalini can go down the spine because even if it's awakened in the heart, it has to go down and proceed through the Sushumna pathway. We speak about it. There are videos out there which I speak about it in greater detail, in more concise manner. In the Kundalini course that we have on our website, we go in great detail about this whole variety of ascents. But yes, it is normal. Lately, I have been experiencing spinning and body moving into movements without my doing. There is also a feeling of absorption and a feeling of being on psychedelics. Yet I just lost the question. Yet I cannot fully surrender. Do you have any guidance on how to surrender so that they can move into the stage needs? So surrender is not something we can fork out. It's not something that we do. So the proper understanding of surrender is not like, okay, surrender. Some teachers say surrender, and some people, okay, just surrender. Let us be very clear about it. The involuntary nature of all true awakenings, whether they are accompanied by a true descent of grace or through receiving a Shakti path, which is the same but it's assisted, or spontaneously taking place because of variety of ways and reasons of how it can happen. All this in terms of clinical understanding, you see, already has its own unfoldment, its own power. So surrendering to that obviously comes from understanding first of what is taking place. We cannot surrender to that what we don't understand. So first comes understanding. Therefore, in all my early years, there was this protocol, rule of thumb. Whenever I would encounter a particularly difficult case where it would be related to me of going through the awakening and with this and this symptomatology, we first go through this ABCs. We go through this, what I'm speaking of right now as that rule of thumb. So first you need to reassure and give that reassurance that this is normal, legitimate process of the maturation of a human soul. This is something which is desired in many traditions and cultures. In many traditions, it belongs to the internal, insulated, hermeneutic part of the teaching and not something that one parades with the banners around. So, of course, it's not spoken about it casually. It's spoken about often in metaphor, conveyed from heart to heart. So, do not worry about how to surrender. Okay? Understand first, and you will see how the surrender will come on its own. Surrender is a byproduct, I would even say. So if you turn surrender into prerequisite, you see, that in itself can be a kind of subtle battle there. So,
Is there something else I can help with?
no, thank you, Siri. You see, a very helpful guy I have here. So, okay, just take a couple more. And during sadhana, how to overcome inertia, especially about getting out of bed. There are periods when I have problem doing it, and then there are periods of extreme inertia that repeat in cycles. Well, inertia, what is it? If we speak about it in terms of how Ayurveda views that, or how Samkhya philosophy views that, inertia belongs to the domain of tamaguna. It's the excess tamas. It's okay because the body is tamasic, right? The tissue's body itself is expression of tamaguna. Mind is sattva and senses are expression of rajaguna. So we need to drive out inertia out from our mind. And meditation and the correct food and daily interactions and daily routine is very important. So we don't succumb to the inertia at the level of the mind. For example, if the body is tired, that's a different thing. It needs to be respected. There's two different things. For example, I wake up, I'm 57-year-old, and it's not that I'm jumping out of bed and want to just like bounce around. So it takes a while for the body to awaken, and doing this, drinking hot water, like showering, this and that. Now it's difficult for me to do the self-massages with oil every day like I used to on a regular basis. And then exercise. Sometimes I feel like the body doesn't want to exercise, but I know some movement is good, so I push a little bit and I do some exercise and it feels better. At other times, you need to listen the symptoms from the body. The body doesn't want to exercise, not because it's lazy, but because it's tired. You see, as I said, um, different phases in our life, different stages. We need to understand what we're going through in terms of energetic qualities, in terms of what we can and what we cannot. But we certainly cannot afford to have tamasic qualities in our mind, because that's what makes us lazy. That's what makes us indolent, you see? And that is the best remedy to that is a proper practice of meditation, food that encourages sattvic tendencies in the mind, and habits that also promote sattvic qualities in the mind. Okay, I'll take two more and we will wrap it up. Okay, folks? 3 years ago, I had an involuntary Kundalini awakening after having a series of panic attacks. The energy pushed violently through my system until I reached out top of my head. Since then, it hasn't come down. Is it possible that it went through the wrong channel, as it has been very forceful? What shall I do? It's very difficult to say it like that, very, like on the spur of the moment, to give these diagnostics like this, diagnosing and giving the response based on just like, um, so it feels like energy doesn't come down, hasn't come down. It's very unlikely, but what often feels like that is because we are not grounded enough. You see, in many of the videos out there, we speak about the connection between awakening nervous system and dominating humor. The vata, which is the main of the nervous system, which is the composition of ether and air. It's the mobile element. We move, act, move around because of vata. You see, it's ether and air. And every awakening is accompanied by some form of disturbance of vata. So the true Kundalini movement is always accompanied by that. And therefore, vata management very often is the primary management in Kundalini awakening when it's lacking of that sense of groundness. So this is what you need to look into, how to ground yourself, because most likely the vata went out of balance and perhaps chronically now. And if you have already prior to that had vata constitution as being a primary dosha, then put two and two together, then that's what it will result. So I would suggest you book yourself a good Ayurvedic physician for evaluation and begin that process of rehabilitation through the management of prana through vata management, so that to create greater sense of groundness. Okay. All right, folks. So I think, okay, just last one, and we will, okay, the last one from Chikna 007. What attitude should I take while waiting the process to get fluidity again? It can feel fluid many days in a row, but then comes days with a total discharge of energy. There is no power in Kriyas. Feels like Kriyas barely makes it through in its wave. Thank you, Vamadeva. Don't worry about it. We don't facilitate Kriyas. Kriyas are involuntary. So there are sometimes excess of movements. And that's the problem. You see, then what to do? At other times, there are very quiet times. You see, it's not that the body should constantly process something, or something should constantly be processed through the nervous system to discharge. No, just have the attitude of meet everything as it comes. In our practice in sadhana, there are times of great exhilaration, great excitement, great breakthroughs, profound subtlety, profound refinement, intricacies. At other times, it's just that routine, 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 not much happening. Stay with the routine, okay? Nothing to write home about, very few lines you can write in your journal because nothing is happening. That's fine, okay? Do what you need to do in your daily life. Place your attention into what needs to be taken care of. And Kriyas will come back if they need to come back, when they need to come back. That's the attitude. So thank you all. It was lovely to be together like this. We should do it more often. So please nudge us gently. Otherwise, don't miss that offering, the team pool together. It's going to be available hopefully as of tomorrow, the latest, on our website. It's also entitled Awakening Today. We will add the link pinned to the top right under the video, this video now, this live broadcast. And it's the theme of how individual and collective relate, interconnect, influence each other through a series of very intimate discourses and exchanges that took place in Zurich just a short while ago. Okay, everyone, let us radiate light and love. Let us share it freely with everyone. May everyone be blessed on this auspicious day. May there be peace, equilibrium, balance. May there be fullness, and may light prevail as it will. Blessings to all. Jai Gurudev. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamiva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti